Anybody got something to sacrifice to the demo gods?
That would be helpful. We might need to turn this on. Power.
That was amazing. Who's next?
First presenter problems. There we go. Okay. Hey, my name is Garvin. I'm a software engineer at Invoca and a co-organizer for Santa Barbara JavaScript. And there's a picture of me when I had short hair and some social media stuff that you could find me on. I'm going to talk about a recent project that I undertook, which was like taking a legacy-ish grunt pipeline and bringing modern ES6 Plus to all of our front-end apps at Invoca. So the Invoca app overview, we've got a Rails application, and we have 29 front-end applications that are all used for different features. We support IE 10 plus. All of our apps are built on Backbone, data tables, and React. However, up until pretty recently, outside of the React stuff, we didn't have any. And we had a shared grunt pipeline. So I thought that would be a good place to step in and bring modern JS to everyone. So some considerations going into it with 29 different apps. I was thinking that every app was unique. So we would need to have each one get QA'd a little bit since we're going to transform all of the code. We already had Browserify in place, and we were using Browserify transform to get React JSX into ES5. I wanted to have all of our tests be transpiled too, so you could be thinking in ES6 all the time. Didn't want any ES5 inversion control at all, and all the devs needed to know that they could and should use it. So first thing I did was refactor our grunt file and some of our custom modules that we had, and that was great because since that was already running on Node, I remade that using some classes with class syntax and all ES6 stuff, which was pretty cool. Because there's 29 different apps, I actually made it opt-in. So you would add a file called .es6 to the root of the front-end app, and then as it was added in, then each app could get its own QA. We have really good automation for QA, but I didn't think that was quite good enough. Also, making it opt-in, and as well as trying to work around our existing transform processes, we would have Babel only target a certain file name pattern. So we excluded anything that had .react.js, which is what our React files, our JSX files already had. And then for our tests, I had it, or non-tests, I had it just target anything in the app directory that was .js, but that excluded .react.js. All the tests would target _test.js. And I had it all transpile into a directory called .es5. So that was added to git ignore, so none of that would be in version control or anything like that. And having it there was nice because we were able to update our paths in the grunt file to point to the code that was in ES5 if you were opted in, because that's what we wanted to ship out to the browsers. So lastly, I needed to spread the word that you could use ES6 Plus. So I gave a little lightning talk to our dev team that was about 15 minutes, highlighting some of the features and talked about how to enable it. And then for any code reviews that I've been tagged in, I've always been thinking in the ES6 mindset, being like, oh yeah, you should use arrow functions here, things like that. And that's it. Any questions? All right, thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. That's what I'll do.
Hello, my name is Lee. I am a professional Ionic developer, but I'm not an expert in anything, so don't take anything I say too seriously. I wanted to talk today about Stencil.js. One second. Might as well pull up my notes since I can't get the slides working. So, as you know, HTML is static, and frameworks like React and Angular make it dynamic by, breathing life into HTML components. React does it with components, and Angular does it with directives. But wait, there's actually a W3C spec for that. It's been around for years. It's called Web Components. Unfortunately, there is almost no browser support for it whatsoever. So enter Stencil.js from the creators of Ionic. Stencil is kind of like Babel or TypeScript in that it lets you use modern standards today. They took the most lovable parts of React and Angular, specifically JSX and TypeScript, and sort of formed them together, and they used TSX. And they built a super light framework that does most of what the other frameworks do in creating components and being reactive. And except that the main difference is that Stencil runs at compile time rather than at runtime, improving compatibility and speed, making the whole thing lightweight. The only thing, let's see. Okay, so, and if you want to make it more reactive, you could just use other libraries like RxJS. So this addresses the isolation problem that React components have, in that you don't really see a lot of... Oh, no, I don't have the proper connector. So, React components are not really compatible with anything else. They are their own entity, so you can't like use Bootstrap or Foundation with React. So and also Angular directives are kind of bulky, even with like Angular 2 and 4. They're still kind of bulky. They're not as easy to implement as JSX components. So Stencil basically solves that problem, and it allows you to build using those tools for any framework. And even if React gets overtaken by something else in the future, Ionic Stencil will still work with that framework regardless. So Ionic 5 will actually be using Stencil to allow developers to build mobile apps and PWAs in either React or Angular or whatever comes up with the Ionic templating system. Any questions? So yeah, check out Stencil.js. It's pretty cool and it's fun. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so what do I need? 2 of them?
Yeah, that one's for the live stream. We weren't able to.
Okay, I see. Cool.
Good.
Um,
And then
I thought I already connected it.
Should work for you.
Weird. Maybe I should use your cable.
Try this one.
I brought mine. Oh, I saw something happen. Did it happen?
Something's happening. Yes.
Okay, cool.
You'll get it.
Yeah. So this is me right here. I work at a company called Comprendo. I'm a UX designer. That's it. This is where I work. I had been wanting to learn JavaScript, so I don't know why a team let me come here, because I'm kind of not very proficient with JavaScript. I do so on my free time I work on my Unity project. So that's kind of, I know C#, and that's what I do on the side. I don't know why I closed my project, but it was there anyways. I built a library of JSON in C# using Visual Studio, the Xamarin.Mac library. And at the office, we deal with a lot of JSON to basically author content and publish it to the on the cloud. So it became such an issue that no one told me to build this. And when they did, they liked it a lot, but but this is only for Mac. So they wanted me to. I told them that I could do this for JavaScript, for the web. So so a couple of weeks ago, I began taking a couple of tutorials on Lynda, and I have. Oh yeah, so I wanted to do processing. I don't know if you guys know about processing. It's like a JavaScript then to do visual art, motion graphics and stuff. It's pretty cool. Anyway, so I built this thing using CodePen, and it's basically the same thing that I showed you here. You just basically have an image and you load a library of JSON. And I built this with JavaScript. Someone told me that it was a more efficient way to do this using string literals, template strings, or literals. Oh my gosh, see, I lost it. But anyway, I was using the object load method, and someone told me on IRC, yeah, that's not how you do it. So you have to this is the better way to do it. So I built all my buttons. So you press basically here, and you load all these guys. And I learned that you can do this data property, and because every one of these buttons have a specific name, I can just basically load with this simple method. I can just basically retrieve the name of the button and load every single element, every single JSON and graphic. So anyway, this is pretty much it. You get your buttons, and now basically we can load the same JSON that that I built there in JavaScript, and that's all I have. Yeah.
All right, good stuff. Next up, we've got 3 Procorians back to back. So we got Brock and Noah talking about semicolons. How many people are using template literals? Template literals are pretty awesome. They're arguably not one of the most important features, but they certainly are useful. And when you combine them with tag functions, they actually get really powerful. Tag template literals basically like a template engine. That's going to be for the live stream. This is for here. So yeah, template literals are awesome. All right, you're up.
All right. Will it work?
Let's try it.
Jiggle the handle. That's the technical term for it.
We'll fix it before it gets to QA. All right.
Don't touch it.
Boom. I've never heard that many people be happy to see semicolons on the screen. So it's a good start so far. Well, I'm Brock. I work at Procore. And a couple months ago, I started omitting them in personal projects and wasn't sure why. And I was just kind of doing it until I decided, let me kind of look into this. What's happening here? So in JavaScript, semicolon is an empty statement. This is a valid program saying do nothing 3 times in JS. And most of the time, you could kind of consider semicolons optional because it's built in the specification of a feature where I don't want to get into it, but it's while parsing the grammar, if it finds a symbol not in the formal language and it's a new line, yada, yada, yada. So anyways, this feature for inserting semicolons is called insertion. No. Semicolons as a search? No. It's called automatic semicolon insertion. And in general, loosely, you can kind of think of new lines a little bit as a place to use semicolons, and as well as a place you definitely want to use them are inside for loops. So it's part of it that you have to use them in a for loop. And you could also use them for an empty statement. So to kind of express those 2 things before, we have a for, kind of 3 arguments separated together. And you could omit instead of doing an empty block, you could use a semicolon. It's perfectly valid. The thing is, you might think, oh, well, I don't want to deal with when it will be there or when it's not. Kind of be careful because it's always watching you. It's always going to be running. So a gotcha might be, oh, I have a long return line. Well, let me put it on the next one. Nah, it's not going to work out. This is what's going to happen when it gets ran through and you're going to get undefined. So I don't know, put it on the same line, wrap it in some braces, parens. They both work. Kind of rules that might get you sad for this. Oh, I'm always going to use semicolons, or that return. Some break and continue if you are using those with the following parameter: throw, postfix, and prefix, or just postfix, decrement, and increment. The real reason I want to give this talk is for these gotchas. If you're omitting them, you should be aware of these times I will get you. So first one, open paren. Well, all this is valid JavaScript. And why? I didn't go into the spec far enough to know and think of a line right here. So if you want to, go ahead, read the spec. And if you do that, don't tell me why. Place why this gets you is you're exporting some code, and you want to immediately invoke function. In this case, kind of related to here, it's going to go to the previous line and think you're calling something or doing an expression in there. So to get around this, if you're exporting code, you should definitely put a semicolon before. It's going to could protect other devs posting issues on your thing. So when to definitely use it is inside a for loop and before an iffy. Then we also have a square bracket. And here again, this is some valid JavaScript. The new line is not going to turn into a semicolon. And a real life issue that you might run into is, oops, supporting Internet Explorer. And you kind of want to get some DOM elements together using query selector, and you want to for each them. Well, in IE, you might have to do something like this. But again, this is going to fail. It's going to append the square bracket to the previous statement. So you can work around, I don't know, does this fix it? Will semicolon fix it? Either way, you choose what to do. Backtick. So kind of mentioned, we have tagged template literals. And again, the new line will not be a semicolon for you. Another one is / for regex. Just kind of watch it. Is it fixed? I don't know. You can do it. You can put a semicolon. Just kind of be aware of those gotchas. So if you're omitting them, you should definitely use them inside a for loop. You have to, in fact. And before these 4 characters, which includes the iffies to protect you. And I was reading online stuff, and I thought, oh, it'll just be a quick talk to do a little bit of research. Oh, it was a pretty big pissing contest, and I stopped. So if you want to look into minification, if you want to look into ASI performance, if that's where your performance issues are, then you better keep that a secret to yourself. And file size of omitting them, is that whatever. Basically, do what your team feels most comfortable with, and that's my talk. And please, no questions. No questions about semicolons.
Thanks, Brock. Great talk. How many people use semicolons in their code? How many people don't? So I mean, it is largely a stylistic issue, right? Aside from those few gotchas, ultimately, just pick one standard. As long as like half your team's not using semicolons, the other is, then I have no problem. Anyway, next up we have another Procore. We have Marcus Bernalis talking about yin and yang, the difference between imperative and declarative paradigms. Does everyone know what ASI is? Anyone not know what ASI is? So it stands for automatic semicolon insertion. So the spec basically says that semicolons are optional, right? And it will insert them for you. The compiler will insert them for you. So it's over at ASI, that's what that is, automatic semicolon insertion. I'm a big believer in being explicit. If the language makes it optional and putting them in there makes the code clearer, I'm all for making the code clearer. That's just me. I'm all about explicit. Too many implicit things trips up developers.
True.
All right, you good?
True. Oh, it's yellow. Got my mood lighting. All right.
This is the live stream. What's that? Anyway, fails.
All right. All right, cool.
Good.
Party time. All right, what's up, y'all? This is, I'm Marcus, and this is the Tau of JavaScript. Tau means the way, but this is more like a way, not the way, because there's tons of ways to do front end. You can see them all in our code base. And so this is the first part of a trilogy of talks. The first one's yin and yang, the duality of imperative and declarative paradigms. I wrote this really late at night and got really overdramatic about it. So there's a tree with yin and yang. But this came up because I want to really just delineate the difference between the two. I think they're thrown around a lot, and it's kind of arbitrary until you see some examples. So I'm going to be covering examples of imperative versus declarative and when I choose to use it. Again, this is a way, not the way. So declarative is at a high level, what needs to be done and not how to do it. So it's like, pack your bags, meet me in the car, we're going to Vegas. All right. Imperative is how to do what needs to be done. So it's a little bit less punchy. It's grab the bag from the closet, we'll pack some clothes and a toothbrush, walk towards the door and open it and lock the door. Then head towards the car, open the car door and sit down. And then we're going to Vegas. So when I'm jumping into a new project, it's a lot easier to look at the high level stuff and then choose to go into the weeds if I have to. And that's a big strength of React, but we're going to get to that later. So as a fun game, who can help me identify which is imperative and which is declarative here? So on the left, if it's imperative, raise your hand. Declarative, on the left. All right, cool. And now on the right, if it's imperative, raise your hand. Okay, if it's declarative, raise your hand. I think y'all mostly got it right for the people who did choose to vote. This is America, after all. Yes, so we have the top is declarative, the bottom is imperative. And one like cheat code to figure out which is imperative, it's usually one with an if statement in it. This one doesn't have one. But what you can see is we're telling it how to loop through this thing. Whereas over here, I'm just saying, for this array, map it to this function. It's not telling how we go through the array. It's just saying do it and spit this thing out. And then at the end, join it. So over here, we don't have the join. That's my bad.
And imperative and declarative are in the name.
Yes, but I blocked it out in the previous one.
Oh,
Oh, I did. Oh my God. Wait. Did y'all cheat? Ah, Danny. Play along, guys. Play along. All right. Okay, I did it right this time. All right, so on the right side, imperative, declarative. If it's imperative, put up a 1. If it's declarative, put up a 2. All right. That's confusing. It's ambiguous. All right, now for the left, put up a 1 if it's imperative, a 2 if it's declarative. Can y'all see it all right? Is it? Sorry, that's my bad, y'all. Imperative, declarative, just yell it out. All right, you already did it. Good job. Yes, so over here we're setting up a nice global variable to hold what I clicked. Then we set up one event listener with a bunch of if statements inside, so we filter out the ones that don't have I. Another event listener just for the mouse up, so we can clear out the global variable afterwards. And the bulk of the fun stuff is in the mouse move here. This is using observables from RxJS. And you see we can actually reuse the mouse down, mouse move, and mouse up. We can combine it with other streams if we choose to. So here, again, there's no if statements. We're just saying, give me all of the targets where the ID includes -d. And then basically this turns this stream, it maps it to the result of what's coming out of this stream. So I click down, and then it gets taken over by all my mouse movements. And I take those mouse movements until I let go of the mouse. It's declarative. It says do this, take until, literally take until this. It's not saying if I mouse up, then switch it to false, and now this if statement no longer is true, and so it stops. Does that kind of make sense? All right, so that's declarative versus imperative. In the real world, it becomes a little bit less clear. That's why it's the yin and yang. You know, the white side has a little bit of black in it, vice versa. So how I generally try to organize my declarative versus imperative code is in the components, stateless ones. I try to make them as declarative as possible. So no if statements here, just exactly what it is. Looks a lot like normal HTML. Views, my bad. Reducers, those can be about halfway. These are pretty declarative, but you could have an if statement in there, like if it's loading, then return something else. Those will creep up in there. Selectors, so this is my bad if you guys don't use a lot of React. This is generally for an internal audience, but so you can see this part is pretty declarative. Create selector. This is what the function we're going to create the selector from. That's going to return a function that takes the columns, the result of this, and then just like PDF the columns. That's declarative. Over here, a little bit less declarative. All right, so in the helpers and utilities, this is where you start to like, you hide all the stuff. It's like you're hiding your junk under the bed and your room looks clean. You start to put all the if statements and the gross logic. So when you're reading it from your top level files, like, oh yeah, get group value. Makes sense. What it's actually doing is like, oh, look at all this hard-coded strings. And at the very bottom, your business logic and side effects can be a lot more imperative. This is your stuff like your thunks, like flow control. You can see here we got a try catch with an if inside. But from the top level, like from the view, you're just seeing, oh, create fetch columns. Okay, so you can dive into the complexity when you choose. And so the takeaways I'm trying to give you guys here are declarative code is easier to read and build upon. So during the entry points to your code, try to make it as declarative as possible so that the person can be like, oh, I got to fix the column fetching, that one. And then they can just go to that file instead of having to parse all this stuff and bring all this context into their minds. Next one is, yeah, trend towards keeping common entry points as declarative as possible. And imperative code happens, just hide it behind descriptive declarative functions. The bonus to that is it makes it easier to test. And that's, yep, that was all. Thanks. Any questions? Questions? No. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. The main takeaway I got from that talk is that I'm going to grab Marcus and have him explain RxJS to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
All right.
I get the concept, like observing collections over time. It's kind of like the Streams API. And every time I've looked at implementations, it seems really abstruse. And I end up just the best explanation I ever saw for it was this picture of one of those Swiss Army knives that has like 1 million daggers coming out of it. It said it's just like that, only it wants to stab you. All right, so up next we have another Procorian. We have Kyle Espinola talking about continuous serverless JS deployments. How many people are familiar with serverless technology? I'm not gonna go into that any deeper. I don't want to spoil Kyle's talk. I just want to get engaged. Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. This one's for the live stream. This one's for Next time, I think we'll just get one laptop and keep it connected.
Yeah.
Everybody's talks.
Hopefully this isn't too painful. Nope. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kyle Espinola. I'm a developer here at Procore. I started in the front end, but now I'm working on DevOps. Today, I'm going to show you a little bit mix of both. We're going to look at how to take a Relay application, which is GraphQL's front end language, and deploy that to AWS using Circle CI as your continuous integration tooling. So this is a little example of the type of app that we can publish on AWS. It has our routing, it has detail pages, and the like. So let's get started. I did a little bit different. I didn't put a presentation. I actually put a talk together as a demo site and posted it up on my GitHub page. So you can follow along with this and come reference it whenever you like. But let's get through the steps. Always with the node package, we're going to start by installing packages and getting dependencies. Some key ones we see here are GraphQL, Relay, Neutrino, some Babel. I use Husky here to do some code formatting before we commit the code. And then always an important piece when you're looking at a node project is your scripts. So we have a start, a build, some Relay scripts, and then some pre-commit things going on here. So that's going to be where we always start. Now that we're doing Relay, we're going to look at setting up some Relay. And some advantages you get from this setup are when you're writing your queries for your Relay backend, it's going to check against your schema and let you know if you're writing a valid query for your GraphQL endpoint. As well as, let's see, it's going to watch your files and it's going to create a static JSON representation of that for your backend server to potentially start prefetching, as well as just more robust and standard query language. So it's going to be generating, watching files and generating an object that represents your query as you're changing your code. And then now we need to get a schema.graphql. Most libraries you use will have a command to execute and generate the schema GraphQL. It's your type definition for your endpoint. It says that you can query a shop. It has a name. It has products. Those products have images. If you're going to do one just from this works with any GraphQL endpoint. Just make a curl request to that endpoint. Add this query, which is just a string, but it's their introspection query. It lets the GraphQL endpoint to tell you exactly what you can do on that endpoint. So if you just do a curl request to that, it will generate a schema JSON file. And then in this project, I have a npm run schema command that will take the JSON file and create the schema GraphQL, which is what your Babel transpiler is using to validate all your queries against. So that's going to be in the project. Oh, and at the top here, I have a link to the repo that's like this demo repo. So anyone who wants to get started with Relay can use it as a starting platform. Okay, a little bit look at the project structure. Anytime we're doing modern JS, we're going to have to transpile our JavaScript code. I choose to use Neutrino in this project, which is a wrapper around Webpack that lets you define presets and kind of share snippets of the configuration more easily. We're also using this in Procore to make sharing configs a bit simpler. So I can see that I'm using the React preset. I'm setting up my Babel here with a little bit extra Relay. We have flow type checking in the project, so it's gonna check for types anytime you put the flow annotation. A little bit of setup on the dev server. Anytime, any route that matches, we want to always serve the index HTML. That's a critical point in putting these S3 buckets. Your index HTML page is going to load up your route config, and then your client-side router is going to take control of showing 404s and all the pages. So that helps you in your development environment always turn the index page. We're injecting a GraphQL endpoint, and here's a little bit extra for dev server setup on hot loading. I'm not going to go too much into this. It's just an overview of the project's folder structure. If anyone's curious about examples how to put together a project, I commonly go with the approach of having screens represent any of the viewable aspects, normally adjacent to your routes that a user can see, and components are going to be a lot of your stateless, just kind of input object and get back HTML. What you'll notice a lot with Relay is that you're not going to have anything like a module or any sort of like state management component to it, because routes are declarative. You save with it what data it needs, and it's going to resolve that for you. So you don't need Redux or any sort of there's no HTTP library in this project. It's all used Relay. So then give that a look. Now here's some of the fun stuff. So if you want to take any piece of this talk with, but you're setting up AWS accounts. First thing you're going to need IAM for your repo. So go ahead and make a relay starter. I only give them programmatic access. The resources that will need on your account is S3 and CloudFront. This says full access, but make sure to restrict it to only resources like your bucket and the CloudFront. Finally, download your access key and secret, and we're going to put that in Circle CI in a little bit. When I go set up my S3 bucket, I'm going to make it public. So there's a little screenshot of making that public. You specify that it's going to do static website hosting, and we mark the index.html as the root of it. And then we set up CloudFront. So CloudFront is going to be our CDN. It's going to make sure that S3 doesn't actually get all the requests, because that's going to charge you a lot of money, and it's not going to be as fast because CloudFront's distributed across the world. So in setting up that, it's quite easy with AWS. You kind of have a drop down here, and you can say, okay, I want to use this bucket as my distribution. I map all my requests, the indexes, to master relay AWS, because that's what S3 will put your files, not just in your bucket name, but like in another extended path. So you do that. This was pretty fun. In order to get it always serving the index page on CloudFront, we go set up a custom error page, and like any 404 pages, we just give it to the index page, and we say it's a status 200. And then again, the React app is going to handle the routing from there, and you'll have your 404 page inside of that, or it will most likely just field the results. Okay, so once we have our AWS account, we save those credentials over. We're going to go over to Circle or Travis or whoever you're using for your continuous deployment, and we're going to set that up. We use Circle here, or I use Circle, so this is going to be a Circle example. This is a little snippet of a modern Circle CI2 config. What's happening is we have two jobs. We have a build job and a deploy job. The build job is going to be responsible for taking all of our assets, actually creating our ES5 bundle, and saving it in a workspace or like an artifact. And then when it comes time to deploy, I just load up Circle Python, include the appropriate environment variables to get the AS client working. And what we do is we do a sync command to our S3 bucket, which basically takes our current build command and overrides anything that we have on S3. And finally, another gotcha is that you're going to want to invalidate your index.html on your CloudFront. Otherwise, you're going to be caching your old index bundles. But you just run this command, it will invalidate, and you'll go get the new assets. So that's a little bit look at Circle. Here's like a workflow diagram where we're going to build, and we're only going to deploy when the branch is master. So that kind of locks in your Circle development. Here's kind of setting up a project. You're just going to go to projects, press setup, and away you go. This is a list of the environment variables needed to power this repo. When we saved our credentials, we're going to upload our AWS access key and secret access key. Circle is already looking for the environments, or as soon as we include the AWS CLI, it's going to look for these, or want to look for these environment variables. And if you have them set, then you're good to access your AWS account. We put in the public path to the CloudFormation, and that's kind of the full setup. Again, it brings you a full website with routing and whatnot, and it should be super cost effective for you as well. Thank you. And then my GitHub is KSEspinola, KSEspinola, and you can find this demo repo and my GitHub pages right there.
Awesome, thank you, Kyle. Is anyone not familiar with serverless? I'm not on that one. It's kind of like this evolution, right? We used to deploy things on hard machines, like bare metal. And then we figured out how to virtualize that metal, virtualize the hardware, right, with virtual machines. We figured out how to virtualize essentially the operating system so we can containerize applications. And now we're taking one step further, taking all that out of the equation, basically deploying functions in the cloud, right? And letting the infrastructure provider deal with all the rest of it, calling out the actual CPU and OS and whatnot. Fascinating stuff, and you pay for only what you use. Good stuff. All right, next up we've got Ian Nicholson. He's going to talk to us about Paper.js animation framework plus miscellaneous. I'm really looking forward to the miscellaneous part. All right. Here. This one's for the live stream.
Oh, I can't put that on my pocket. Okay.
Good.
Mm-hmm. Is that like a joke around here or something? Anyway.
It's the Wilhelm scream. It's almost like every movie and TV show.
Uh-huh.
It's like an Easter egg. Somebody's like,
Oh, this changed. Check, check. I'm Ian Nicholson. I'm a student. I put some bugs or maybe bad practices in the code you'll see later just to keep you guys on your toes. So this is Paper.js. It's an animation framework. Has anyone heard of Patatap? No one? Okay, that's good because I built like a light version of it and you wouldn't be as impressed if you saw the original thing. So they got some examples here. Paper.js uses the HTML canvas, and I thought it was really nice that this is pretty cool. They give you the source right here, and you can just go in and change settings. Now it's different. The documentation was pretty good. Not that it matters because you know you're going to be Googling or Stack Overflowing first, but that was a joke. So yeah, it's really comprehensive in any way. But we'll get to what I made, and that is a Patatap Lite clone. So basically on these key down events, we create these little circles, and using this sound library that I found on GitHub. And so how is this done?
were you pressing keys now?
Yeah, so that's I'm looking for key down events on keys A through Z. Yeah. So these are HTML5 audio elements. I may have violated separation of concerns here because I stuck the styling in as a data attribute, but I'd be happy to hear like suggestions for how to implement that. So all these audio files were assigned a data key corresponding to a letter, which I'm going to later listen for. And unfortunately, there is no ES6 support for Paper.js. It would have made stuff like using a template literal here to clean that up. That would have been really nice, but you get what it is. OnKeyDown is a method that the framework gives you, and that's basically the event listener. So here I'm looking for key down events corresponding to a key that I have audio file with the corresponding key. And when that happens, we call in this point method. We create a random point somewhere on the canvas, then create a circle of a random size, play the audio, and then we're managing state down here. And then the animation is handled with an on-frame method that the framework provides. As the circles are going forward in time, they shrink and they change color here. And then finally, when they get below a certain size, they're just removed from the array. And I'll show you the real thing. So they really got into it, but I just thought this was a really nice implementation of it. And you get a whole suite of different sounds and animations when you press the space bar. So that's that. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thanks, Ian. I love the stuff with visualizations and audio on the web these days. Gabor and I did a talk last year on the Web Audio API, and it took me back to my days of programming FM synthesizers back in high school. The Yamaha DX7. Anybody? I'm old. Okay. Anyway, next up we've got Elijah Lovejoy, and he talks about end-to-end testing with Cypress.js. How many people do end-to-end testing? Nobody does end-to-end testing. I don't hear yet. Yet being an awkward word. End-to-end testing is amazing. It gives you confidence that the application runs from start to finish. As you go refactor things, you can catch cascading bugs that may have been introduced by your code. Unit tests are obviously the building block, and then you got integration tests, functional tests, end-to-end tests are super valuable. And I will be talking to my colleagues about them. In fact, you probably hear me incessantly talking about them before we start actually going. But you can always just tell me I'm full of shit too. All right. So this one's for the live stream. Okay.
Cool. Oh, awesome. All right. Hey, hey. Oh, it's so exciting when it changes resolution like that. So I decided I'm working at a small startup. We're just getting everything going. Our unit test coverage is okay, but we needed some automation around around end-to-end testing for React Redux app with a serverless backend. And so I kept trying to figure out what's the one that everybody uses, not Selenium? How that, and every time I went to look at the Selenium documentation, I got distracted by other things. This is the one that really grabbed my attention. If you hadn't heard of it, so I'll show you kind of how it works, and there's a GitHub at the end if you get excited and you want to play with it. So on my application, we want to know if we can, log in, create a record, just do a couple things, just make sure that the basics are all wired together end to end. It might be on a, local front end against an AWS backend, or it might be everything's up on AWS, but we have a bunch of environments. So I started with the Redux to-do sample app just because it's easy and because Redux is amazing. So you just do an npm install and start, so you've got everything up and running locally. And it's not going to be a big surprise. You do an npm install on Cypress, and it's going to install itself. And then when you run it, what was kind of an interesting surprise to me is it actually installs an app that runs on my Mac. And it puts a bunch of files into the project. You can see there's a Cypress directory, which is where your specs are going to go, and there's a configuration file. But mostly, I still haven't figured out everything that the configuration does, but it seems at this point they're still in beta, but it's starting to look pretty robust, so I'm excited about it. And basically, the app that fires up lets you run individual specs.
And so what I've got here is a trivial spec on the right side and an editor. And on the left, you can see if you're opening a page, it would open over here. I'll show that next. And basically, it's just going to run through your test, tell you what's working and what's failing. You can even click on individual tests to get more information. And what's neat is the syntax is kind of readable and makes sense. And what's really exciting is what you can see here is we're now opening this trivial to-do application. And if I would together, if I had my act together, I could show it typing it in there. But what's really cool here is that, you know, to go to a URL, you just tell it cy.visit, and you can go to the URL. And if that didn't work, it would give you an error. And if it works, it just keeps going through your script. You can grab a selector, type it. This is an input. You can type in the input. You can check that it got typed correctly. You can then find a button, and you can click the button. And after that, so you're typing one, and you get the result. So pretty trivial. But what's nice here is as you're saving this, it's rerunning over here. So it's really easy to work and debug. And it's just, it was just easy. Maybe Selenium is easy too. It didn't seem like it was. The way they're monetizing this is they're providing a dashboard service. It's free for like public stuff. So I can, it's actually free for everybody right now. But basically, I've done a bunch of Jenkins, so this looks a lot like Jenkins runs. I think all the CI systems are the same. So passing, how long it took. You get a key for your project. You pass that key when you do the run, so it opens a headless browser and takes a video, uploads the video. And so obviously a failure later on, you can then click on it, and this is kind of a shitty screenshot, but you can go to the video of your run, and if something didn't work out, you could click on the video, watch it, see what happened. So integrates nicely with the CI. So that's it, actually. I put everything into GitHub. So if you grab that, 2 of my developers have tested that this actually will probably run if you're on a Mac, probably not on a PC. And it's as kind of as simple and easy as you would kind of hope it would be, and only in Chrome. And so I'm having a ton of fun playing with it. Maybe you will too.
How do you deal with async? Like when you click on something, it fixes
Oh yeah. So they've put a ton of thought into it, and so basically by default it's going to wait different timeout for different things. But you can, so if you have something that's like a normal slow, like might take like two seconds, it's probably just going to work, and you can just try it. And then if you like, my login right now is really slow. And so I told it to wait until a particular DOM element was on the page, and then it'll just sit there and wait for longer, and you can even set an additional timeout. So it's got, they've really thought about all the race conditions and how to not have to deal with it. So if a manual tester would sit and stare at a page for a while, it'll do that. So far, it does it really nicely. I'm kind of at the beginning, so I don't want to say like I know this is great, but I'm really having fun playing with it, so I'll share it. Yeah.
So working for a startup that typically has like the work fast and break things mentality, how have you been pushing like a testing focused culture?
Well, so I'm the CEO, and so I write tests. And then I'll do code reviews, and I'll ask people to write more tests. So trying to be nice about it, and also trying to find places where, you know, just and testing is hard, right? And it's iterative, and you know, use good tools like for unit, you know, write unit tests first, and then I'm really trying to figure out like how to create simple end-to-end tests that'll just tell us if the engine's running, right? And then get those deployed and built into the CI. But it's so hard. I mean, I've never had enough testing on any team I've ever worked on. So that's why I'm writing tests. Thank you.
Thanks, Elijah. He's absolutely right. The best way to get testing and tool shift. But a great example first. But the cool thing about it, to that point precisely, if you are so, if it builds things fast and breaks things, testing is going to give you that freedom. Right? I mean, ultimately, what we want in a coding environment is to code fearlessly. That's why we use things like version control and automated deployment. Right? The same goes for testing. If your testing blocks, your basic building blocks for your application are well tested and let you write code fearlessly, knowing that you'll catch those simple regressions, right? And if you're not doing end-to-end testing, just do it, man. If whether you use Cypress or Protractor or WebDriver IO, or there's a half dozen other frameworks out there, it's a really valuable tool. Anyway, let's get a picture of all you fine folks. You guys all signed the waiver, right? The photo waiver. It means I get to use your photo forever. We're gonna get a turnout tonight. Cool. Actually, let's get an SPJS selfie. All right, everybody smile. Cool. All right. All right, next up we've got Luan Vieira. And Luan is going to talk to us about solving business problems with JS, because that's actually why we all go to work every day. It's not just to play with cool, new, shiny toys. Someone's actually paying us to solve business problems. Always keep that in mind, right? I love to play with new stuff, but not just for new stuff's sake. When it's actually going to solve somebody's business problem. All right, this is the live stream. Next time we're also going to do like the one mic to rule them all. All right. I just realized all my bullshit monologues are going to be on the live stream because I can click on them. So people on the live stream are seeing me up here. Where is that? Probably for the best.
Oh, where's the cable though?
You got it. All right, you're on there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nope. All right. So I'm going to talk about solving customers' problems with JavaScript. So my name is Luan Vieira. I'm actually in the customer success department at Invoca. So I work in this team called Technical Success. And our team helps our customers scope and execute new integrations. And part of it is actually writing JavaScript that our customers deploy on their pages. So today I'm going to talk about one specific customer that we worked with to help solve their problem. So before I get into the problem, I need to explain a little bit about what Invoca does. So Invoca tracks calls like clicks. So basically, if you were to Google Invoca, this ad will come up. If you called that number right there, we'll know that you called. We will know that you Googled Invoca and called. But what happens if you click on the link and go to the page? So if you do that, it will land on the page. This is not invoca.com, but you'll basically land on the page, and what will happen is the phone number will change like that. So the phone number that's on the page, on the HTML at first, will get replaced with the phone number. So let's see what's going on here. So when you first land on the page, our JavaScript will basically make a call to the server and say, hey, can I please get a phone number? And our server will respond saying, hey, use this phone number. So, and then that phone number gets replaced on the website. Now, that phone number ending 3944 holds all the marketing attributes that of how I got to that page. And it's really cool, but the problem is you have thousands and thousands of visitors going to your page. Our customers buy a certain package of phone numbers, and when they run out of their phone numbers in their package, our server just returns that basically a catch-all phone number that doesn't really hold any attributes. It just knows that someone made a call, doesn't know why or how they got there. So basically, one of our customers came up to us and said, hey, I'm getting all these calls to this catch-all number, not getting any attribution. Can you just help me solve this? So we took a look at what was going on there. So the customer shared with us how many page views they had on their pages running the Invoca JavaScript. So it was, a ton. And what we found out was that for every each 2 page views, we were handing out 1 unique phone number. Now, we have to hand out that unique phone number because that's the chance that someone's going to call, and then we need to capture it. But the problem was that as we were handing out all these phone numbers, some of them didn't have attribution because they ran out of their package. And we noticed that less than 1% of the phone numbers that got presented on the page were actually called. So we're handing out all these phone numbers, getting very little, basically, value out of it. So how can we make it so that all those calls are actually tracked? Because that gets more value to our customer. So what we found out when we went to the customer's web page was that their phone number was all on a lot of the pages was all the way down at the footer. And a lot of people didn't even scroll all the way down to the footer. They basically would just go to the top of the page and click and leave the page. And we were handing out a phone number for someone who never even saw that phone number. So what we did is, using some jQuery, we basically put a listener on PageReady, on scroll, and on window resize to basically see if the phone number right there was on view. And if it was on view or closed enough, then make a call to the server and get a phone number. If it wasn't, then don't. Just don't. And so that ended up working out really well and got to solve the problem. So here's essentially the core of the code that was delivered. So basically, we're calculating what's the bottom of the page right there. So basically, just using here jQuery. So what's the top of the page? What's the bottom of the page? And where's the phone number? And the footer number selector variable there holds the class selector for the phone number. And then the 300 pixels right here is just the sensitivity, so a little buffer, so that the phone number just doesn't switch on the person. It switches as they're scrolling down. And it basically here, it just throttles. So that, if as the person is scrolling, it will basically, just keep checking whether the person is close enough to the number or not. And it logs it so that, the support team can understand why the phone number never showed up. So I can just show you really quickly what it did. So go into the page right here, and we have debug is on. So it's showing right here. So it says Invoca did not run, as number is not visible on the page. And as I keep scrolling down, it will say how far it is from the phone number. So how many pixels. And then if I finally get it to the phone number, it will say, hey, the code ran, and we got a phone number back. So that's it.
Good stuff. Thanks, Juan. jQuery in action. All right, let's try this again. Ready, guys? 1, 2, 3. All right, that's much better. Outstanding. All right. Did Daniel Bryce ever show up? Not bad. We got all our speakers but one showed up, so that's pretty good, right? All right. We got 2 more for you, and that'll be the event. Next up, we got Lex Kridler. He's going to talk about getting going with ES6. I already asked you guys if you're using ES6, right? Many people are using newer features from ES 2016 and ES 2017. Async await. Who's using async await? Yeah, pretty cool stuff. And we were having a talk. A colleague and I were having a talk today about experimental features that are still in the frozen stage and whether or not you should use them in your code. Stage to play, man. If it's at stage 3, okay. Stage 2 or below. It's risky. Anyone remember I thought that was going to change front-end framework. Does anyone remember that? And it got pulled. That's stage 2. Anyway, I'm neither here nor there with that conversation. All right, you good?
Yeah.
All right, you're up, man.
Cool. All right, my talk today is about ES6 and the future releases of ECMAScript. I get it that this is probably review for a lot of you, and you've seen this stuff before. But for those people who maybe didn't raise their hands earlier to Tim's question, might not have started using it, I think we all benefit when we're all trying to push the web forward, and there's benefits within your team as well. So hopefully you can get something out of this. My name's Lex Kreidler, L-Crids across the internet. I'm a developer at Patagonia in Ventura. So quickly, I'm just going to go over some history. Going to talk about a couple features. I'm not going to try and do the whole thing, and then talk about how you can use it now. So ECMAScript was created in 1998, and then there's another release that was nothing too important there. ECMAScript 3, 1999. And then ECMAScript 4 kind of fell apart. There was a bunch of political stuff going on that prevented the standard from getting released. So it kind of got squashed. And there was no ECMAScript 4. ECMAScript 5 had 2 releases. And then more recently the ECMAScript 6, which we've heard so much about. And a large part of why it was such a thing that we've heard so much about is because there were so many features that were kind of backlogged from some of this chaos in the ECMAScript 4 that didn't make it until this 2015 release. And so they have decided to fix that by going on a yearly release schedule. So just this past June, they released ECMAScript 8, which was relative to ECMAScript 6, a really tight feature set. And there wasn't a lot of new stuff added there. So in the future, we can expect about every year, there'll be a new release of ECMAScript. So I'm going to start with let and const. Traditionally, we use vars to declare variables, and those are scoped based on functions. So as you can see here, we call, on line 5, we call foo, which on line 3 then declares a variable text, but that is scoped to the function. So we don't have access then on line 6 to the variable that's declared and initialized on line 3. But it's only specific to functions. So even though this is a block scope, that variable gets hoisted out of that block scope. And so then on line 5, we do have access to that. So what let and const add, as far as goes, is scope as kind of we expect when we're new to the language. So in that previous example, when the variable was getting hoisted, that's prevented when you use let and const. Const, kind of as the name implies, is when you declare a variable constant. That assignment is immutable. There's some weirdness around if you assign an object at first, because those properties of that object can change. So it's not a deep immutability. It's just that assignment. So this is a classic interview question, one of those trick questions that I've been asked before. And it's, what does this print? Anyone? What is it? Yeah. And the reason that happens is because this gets hoisted. So this code runs instantly. And then a second later, it goes to print the statement. And that I variable is 10 because that loop has completed. So when you're expecting it to be printing 0 through 9, like the first time you look at this, you might expect that. What's actually happening is you're getting the I value after it's been incremented 10 times. Oh. So what let then does is it fixes that by making it a block scope. And so this will print your 0 through 9. So the next one I'm going to talk about is fat arrow. And the first part about it is syntactic sugar. It just makes the code look a little bit cleaner. So in particular, we're going to be talking about line 6 from this code up here. Right now, we just have an anonymous function that's doing our filtering and returning anyone whose age is less than 40. What the fat arrow syntax allows us to do is get rid of some of the characters that we'd have to type for that same exact statement. And again, I'm just talking about the syntax of fat arrow. And it just makes that line, which was previously 3 lines and a lot longer, tighter and more concise. And this might seem like a small win, but these small wins add up for sure. And the more you have them and are using them correctly and have the whole team on board, it starts to add up and it makes the code base just better to work with. So another thing that the fat arrow does is it changes the this context. So this is just a simple event listener on the body that's logging out the this context in that listener callback. And so this would print out the body element. And so you might think, well, okay, let's just replace that anonymous function with this new fat arrow syntax. And but what that does is it uses the scope of the parent. And so in this case, that's the window. And so most likely that's not what you're wanting. You're wanting reference to that element that was clicked. So this is a case where you would still use the old anonymous function syntax. An example of when you want that parent context, that parent this context, would be a situation like this. I use a set timeout, but it could be an animation or it could be anything where in a nested callback, you want the reference to that parent this. And so traditionally, people have been using some type of variation of var that equals this to have a key, like a pointer to the old context within the nested callback. And so you can see here why they need to do that. On line 6, the this is window because it's in the set timeout. Whereas the console log that is the saved body reference. So if we use the fat arrow syntax, which again is using that parent context, you can see that we will no longer need line 4, and we can just reference it using the this. Next up is template literals. This is some more syntactic sugar, which just makes everything more legible. And there's more to all these features, limited a little bit with time. But as you can see, we're just interpolating 2 variables here in this string, having to use the plus sign and be careful with our quotes. Whereas template literals they use the backtick, and you can interpolate variables using the $sign bracket. So this is just super high level, but I actually hope that for those who haven't used this stuff, I hope this creates more questions. And I hope that you can use this as maybe a jumping off point, or at least maybe a reminder of that it is beneficial to try and get these features into your code base, even though they might not seem necessary. There's a bunch that I didn't cover, and I recommend looking some of this stuff up. It's really pretty interesting. If you want to use it today, natively, there's a compatibility chart, which is similar to the Can I Use website that for each feature, it'll tell you which browsers support it. In addition, this compatibility chart will tell you which transpiler supports that feature, which is a great segue into Babel is a framework that transpiles ES6 JavaScript and ES7, any future ECMAScript releases into ES5. And so you can have the future features on the ES5 standard compliant browsers. And that's it. Two last slides. We're hiring a build and release manager at Patagonia. responsible for getting the code to our different environments, and an e-commerce marketing manager. So I'll be around a little bit longer. If you guys are interested or have questions about that, let me know. And then additional resources. I'm not the first person at the Santa Barbara JavaScript meetup to talk about this stuff. There's a couple good talks, at least one by Tim. Wes Boss has a great intro, and Dr. Axel Roschmeyer has a really good website with free books that talk about each of the different JavaScript releases. And he goes into some really interesting detail that's still approachable. And thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Good stuff. ES6 or ES2015 is its proper name. It was the first major update to the language, really since ES3. Almost 20 years went by. The surface area is large, and they've moved to this, as Lex mentioned, this incremental approach. And so a couple of summers ago, early in the year, and throughout the summer, I gave a 3-part series, ES6 in depth, where I kind of went through like 3 hour-long talks plus coding exercises to kind of explore the whole surface area, because it's pretty big, right? And then the following year, ES2016 included exactly 2 features, which means that the incremental updates are working, right? Those features were the exponentiation operator and array.includes, which really made me feel kind of gypped, because it meant that I really couldn't give an ES2016 in depth. It'd be all about 10 minutes long. But it's good stuff, right? It works. It means that we'll get features faster and the browsers will be able to catch up faster. All right, so fantastic speakers so far. We have exactly 1 more speaker to cap off tonight. It's going to be another fellow Procorian by the name of Ryan Yogan. He's going to talk about things that people wish they would have taught him about React Native when he got started. Good stuff.
Thank you, good sir.
2 mics set up here for you. One for the live stream.
I'm really loud.
All right, well, you just want to use that for the live stream. He's dangling around here somewhere.
Just dangling around. There she is.
There you go.
Sweet.
Is that your disposal if you want it?
We'll go crazy if I talk into 2. What's going on? You know what? I'm really loud, so I'm just going to talk like this. First of all, anybody notice something funny? Web standards are about as aggressive. It's like a Toyota Camry at the Indy 500. Does anybody else know? The whole time I just sat there. My whole life I always thought that, but no? Yeah. Not shared? Okay, awesome. So does anybody here, first of all, has anybody ever developed with React Native before? All right. There's some hands up. Who here had a interesting experience? Awesome, or not awesome. And then also, really quickly, does anybody have Expo, the application, installed on their phone? Yeah, it's got to be on the phone. Don't worry, the code and everything else. If you have it up, you could scan that QR code. I see someone's downloading it right now, and you can all talk back and forth. And we'll talk about the technology and all that behind it. But I wanted to give you something to go home with. It's on GitHub. And yeah. Sweet. So 5 things that I wish I knew, or at least some things that I wish existed. So I started React Native development about 2 years ago. Android wasn't even I don't know. At that point, it was a toy to them, really. But it really lended itself well to a particular challenge that I'll talk about. But first, now I'm hot. So, oh, it's zipped on there. Whatever. We're going to preface this a little bit here. This is also shared with everybody that I worked with. I swear one time I almost did throw my laptop against a wall. When React Native first came out, basically you had yourself a fantastic Panini press, $4,000 Panini press. You all know what happens when you run yarn simultaneously with 15 things going on at once. React Native at the time, your fans were just cranking. Wasn't really the most awesome experience once that happened. So what I'm going to get into is kind of, it's going to crank your fans up even more. But the number one thing that I learned, and Look, this is what React Native was really intended for. It was intended for proofs of concepts. It was intended for MVPs, right? You want to determine what is viable. So start easy. Don't do everything on your own. We will get to the app, don't worry. But use something that will bring an ecosystem to you. Don't reinvent the ecosystem. We see this all the time in the JavaScript world. So I like Expo. Expo is fantastic. The reason why I think it's really great is it gives you everything you need to kind of jump and run, and also share it with people. Have you ever built a React Native app and then go, oh, what do I do with this now? Nothing. You put it in test flight, you go through Xcode, you do all the provisioning. At that point, it's just really not a real seamless experience. And you're trying to get an MVP, you're trying to take on Instagram, right? Make that bank. Well, in order to do that, you need to move fast. So I recommend follow some standards, follow something that has all these bridges already written for you. In this particular scenario, I'm referring to expo.io. It is an awesome, awesome, just complete ecosystem now. So that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about. And if that QR code didn't work for some reason, I thought you could read this better. Nope. Did that app work for anybody? Is anybody on it? All right, we got a couple people chatting. Cool, maybe I'll pull it up. Stay only nice stuff about me. So one of the most interesting things about React Native is circa mid-90s, even early 2000s, there was the blue screen of death for Microsoft. Oh, Facebook, thanks, you brought it back. The red screen of death. It's more intimidating, it's scary, and usually it has errors like that. Handle error, block, invoke, dispatch call. These are RPC calls, by the way. That's all behind the scenes. They're just remote procedure calls. There's nothing fancy going on there. But they also bubble up into something pretty ugly. You'd probably rather see something like this. Now, this kind of stuff did not exist when I first started, but it does now. Don't deal with that other thing. Don't look at the red screen. Just don't look at it. But also, you're probably trying to turn on debugging mode, and then you take the phone off and you turn a Symlec on, or you do, a couple things, and it just freaks out. And it's like, debug mode, it needs to be on, and it keeps trying to open Chrome tabs, and you're just like, oh, I'm going to get on Twitter and yell at some engineers at Facebook. Just kidding, don't do that. There's a lot of people in the mix. It wasn't just them, but realistically, you want to use proper debugging tools. These didn't exist, but there's one gotcha. When you start off with Expo and a lot of other tools, they don't all use the same port. So that app that I just showed you, by the way, you can go to GitHub and do all that cool stuff, or you can just literally brew, cask, install React Native Debugger. Give you a little Electron app. What isn't an Electron app these days, right? Let's get that memory up to 32 gigs on my laptop. The most important aspect here, though, is in your package JSON, you'll notice that I put a little thing called debug in there. And then we use Max Open Terminal. I always forget, too. I forget where I saw this. I might have saw it on like YouTube or something. And then just open up the RN debugger. But most importantly, open it in the port that the debugger actually talks in. That's empirically important. If not, you will just sit there and eventually be like, I'm going to learn Swift. This is ridiculous. This is for the birds. This is also for myself because I think I'm probably close to 5 minutes already. Focus. So you want to jump into React Native, and you want to, for some reason, take on Instagram and Airbnb at the same time. We're nerds. We're crazy people. However, I ran into this trap. Now, I run into this trap all the time. But I was like, oh, I got this. React Native. It's just React. But it's going to be on the phone, and I could hand it to people. So for one of my clients, they gave me carte blanche. And I should probably use Scala with Akka streams. I should learn GraphQL for the first time. Sangria didn't exist at the time. I should do all of that first. And then maybe I'll come back to the app. I never built that app, by the way. I did learn a lot about Scala, but I never even got to the front end. The whole point that I want to talk about, or that I really want to, is that bottom sentence. The app that you're using right now is using GraphDAC Cool. We'll talk more about that at the very end if you have any questions. But just focus on that simple little piece and say, this is my MVP and I'm done. I'm done after that. Then I can move to AWS, Azure, OpenWhisk, whatever, we're on Google. Use a service that already exists and you could just go ahead and rapid prototype. That server took me 7 minutes to get up and running. I built the app over lunch. Another thing, learn the magic, all right? If you haven't even dabbled with React and you're like, oh, I want to build a mobile app and I want it to be native, why don't I just go ahead and use React Native? Yeah. Really, that's the whole reason it's there. That's a fantastic idea. But if you don't understand at least some of the core concepts, and I'm talking about an hour, 2 hours tops on React's whatever GitHub IO, I don't actually know the full page, but learn about the lifecycle hooks. Learn about the JSX nuances versus just not using JSX. A lot of people think you have to use JSX. JSX is nothing more than an XML abstraction that compiles down to functions. Learn how they work, because I'm going to tell you why it will come back and bite you in React Native. Another one of the things that I can't drive this home enough, and anybody here that works with me is most likely going to smack me after this, because I'm usually saying don't use abstractions and a bunch of other crazy things. But in this scenario, use abstractions. Do not try and write for both iOS and Android, at least out of the gate. You will never finish your app. Focus on one. And in my personal opinion, styled components, it's fantastic. It's amazing. It allows for theming and a lot of other things. But the best thing, they just really drove it home, is they hit the native part right. I don't care what it is you're trying to build, if it's a modal, if it's a button. As long as you're using styled components, you don't have to say platform equals iOS or Android. It's just going to look proper. And then you'll just have to worry about z-indexing or elevation in the Google world. But other than that, that will set you on a path to bliss and to be able to build that app over lunch in an hour instead of spending 4.5 hours just importing and rewriting the same thing over and over again. The fifth thing I learned, and this is the most important thing that I think everybody needs to know when you get into React Native, in particular if you're building something serious. Remember the word polyglot? Raise your hand if you've never heard. Oh, nobody ever wants to raise their hand when they don't, right? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Everybody, of course, 100%. Awesome. It's not just a clever word. In particular, there will come a time in React Native when something like extreme animations, heavy leverage of the camera, and now even more so when it comes to ARKit, anything to do with augmented reality. The abstractions over that, they're really nice, but the bridges, not so much. If you're wondering what a bridge is, that's how React talks to everything on the back end, Swift, Objective-C, Android. It's just an RPC bridge. So there will come a time when you'll have to learn Swift, Java, Kotlin, Xcode, Android Studio, all of that. Do you have to learn it to the expert level? No, I don't even know what that is. But you will have to dabble a little bit, maybe a little Objective-C. So just be ready, be warned, just like anything else. I like to kind of bring up the MVC framework paradigm. It's very similar to this. It'll get you A to Y, right? It'll get that startup, it'll get you everything that you need, but then there will become a point where it's actually going to become a hindrance in many instances. It's the same thing that will happen with React Native. It'll get you 90% of the way there. But then eventually there's going to be that 10% where you're like, oh, well, this, obviously we shouldn't build an entire video game in React Native. We should probably hire some people that know C++ or Unity. I heard Unity around here. Unity's pretty awesome and it just plugs and plays with it really nice. So just to kind of recap on this, Panini Press, React Native, start simple. Do not try and take Instagram over on the weekend. There actually is a little bit more to that app than just a camera and a timeline. And I think I lost my thing. And that's Finn. And I just really quickly, I'll go ahead and send it all out in the meetup thing if anybody's interested. What I think is actually pretty compelling about the app, my simulator died. But one of the neatest things is that it does use, there was some GraphQL earlier. It really does lend itself well to React Native development as well. If you want to do rapid prototyping, not having to deal with a bunch of Rust endpoints is truly fantastic. It uses Apollo 2, which is newer. Apollo 2 is, there was some observable talk, RX. It's built off of observables. They got rid of Redux. Why? You don't need a bunch of switch statements sitting there. Just have one observable. Marcus really nailed it on abstractions and declarative. Those switch statements, they're down there. Oh, but they're just way down there. If you look at the RX lib, it's just, and at the top, it's beautiful. It's a bliss to play with. So that's my talk. I know I just kind of sat here and really ended up just making fun of React Native, but it's also done a lot of fantastic things for me. I truly love it. I think it's an awesome tool to have on your belt. It is not the only tool. That's a great way to end it.
I have a question.
What's up?
Do you know how to change the color of the red screen exactly? I couldn't figure it out.
I do, actually. Don't use the simulator. No, I have no idea how. I wish I did. Generally, the best way to avoid the red screen of death is have the debugger up. And usually it'll catch a lot of those errors now, and it won't even show up. If you're using Expo, I should note. That's only if you're using Expo. Yes, go ahead.
When it comes to standalone app deployment, have you ever dug into that at all? Or?
So a lot of the apps that I built were more enterprise internal. But eventually, yeah, and then you're kind of, I like Expo for the standard, sharing it around, things like that. And then I would use something else easier like TestFairy, or this is where mobile developers come in with a lot more of the ecosystem. Right. In the end, though, I did end up with TestFlight and all the regular App Store.
At that point, you're ejected out of.
It's just an APK file. So it's the exact two things that you would get from Xcode and Android Studio. Yeah. I wish it was more seamless, but.
Yeah, I know that Expo has.
They do.
Very slow.
It works, 50% of the time, 100% of the time. All good? Awesome. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. I do want to just touch on that slide. Ryan mentioned that eventually there'll be things that are tough to do in JS as there's today. There's already an effort well underway to bridge that gap. How many people are not familiar with WebAssembly? Everyone else knows what WebAssembly is? You guys are all writing for WebAssembly. So it's a new bytecode format for browsers, and basically it is a transpile to target language. Right now for LLVM languages that currently target and scripted, like C and C++. And many applications are going to be like game programming, things that are graphics intensive, computation intensive. But it's a game changer, right? Because once it's available now behind experimental flags in Firefox and I think Chrome also. But it basically is going to then, once the initial proof of concept is out there and people are targeting their C and C++ applications to the WebAssembly bytecode format, people are going to come up with transpilers for Python and Ruby and Scala, you name it, right? So which means that JavaScript will no longer be the lingua franca for the web. Right? It's all about to change. JavaScript is going to stick around for a while. But I really wish John Marinello was here tonight because I never thought I'd ever hear myself say this in 21 years of software development. But if you want to do really exciting things for the web, learn C++. Anyway, that's all we've got for tonight. I want to thank all the speakers that took time out to come up here and speak and also to put together slide decks. It takes a lot of guts to get up in front of a room full of people and give a talk, even a 5-minute talk. It takes a lot of work to put it together. So let's give all our speakers another round, please. This lets me segue to my next thing, which is you too can stand right here like these people did this evening and give a talk to the rest of us. And in fact, our schedule is wide open after Remy's talk in February. Anything JavaScript related is fair game. We want to hear from you. Don't be afraid. All skill levels are welcome. We got a great cross section of people here. So don't be afraid to talk about something that's basic, something that's really advanced. There's always someone here that will get something from it, and we'll always appreciate you give it back to the community. And lastly, again, I'm really looking for a speaker chair. So if anyone wants to take on that position, I can't pay you, but you will get lots of glory from it.
And it's really personally rewarding. So please see me if you're interested. Other than that, that's all we got. We'll see you next month at Work Zones downtown, where Chad will be speaking to us. And other than that, have a great holiday season. Happy New Year. I'll see you guys in 2018.
See you next time.